Hello, my name's Niranjan, the host of Master of Your Crafts podcast, learning from leaders who are continuously inspired, passionate, and driven to align with their soul purpose, sharing their gifts to bring healing to others. The music is composed by Rebecca Everett. Today is episode number 126, and I'll be talking to Mike Hammond, a retired homicide detective in Chicago Police Department. The member of Chicago Police Department of 22 years, he was promoted to detective in 2000, where he served in 4 areas of homicide unit: cold case homicide, the Area North homicide, until he retired in 2016. He is a recipient of the Chicago Police Department Superintendent Award of Valor, Cook County Sheriff Award of Valor, and the Fraternal Order of Police of Lodge Number 7, Distinguished Service Award, and the Chicago Police Department's Life Saving Award. Multiple Chicago Police Department commendations, honorable mentions, and civilian letters of commendations. I trust that you will enjoy this conversation and garner some wisdom from his experiences and how that can be reflected in your own life, regardless of whether you have a homicide detective career or not, but rather the tools, the mechanisms, and the skills and the journey that one goes through life, and mirror that so you can master a skill in order to bring healing to the world at large. Enjoy the conversation. Hello and welcome to Michael. How are you, Michael?
I'm doing great. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Thank you for having me.
you're welcome. You're welcome. I'm really excited to get into this call with you on
Okay.
conversation about your history and the background and the work that you do, which is so, from my perspective, emotionally taxing and probably physically exhausting too. But the emotion that influences your life and your being in the world, being in the world of space of law enforcement, but also drilling down much deeper into um, the death of people, essentially,
Yeah.
which can have so much influence and power over your life and the lives of others and society, and all of that is fascinating to me. So thank you for being online and sharing your story with me ahead of time. And
Pleasure.
also thank you for all the work that you've done, because you're semi-retired from what I understand, right?
Yeah, I'm retired from the police department, correct? Yep.
Yeah, yeah. So that makes a big gratitude for all that you have done.
Thank
Because I can only imagine a lifetime of work in that field and areas. It's a lot.
you. Yeah. Yeah,
It's
there's
a
a
lot.
lot. I mean, I enjoyed the work, but yeah, the emotional toll is was certainly a part of it.
Absolutely. So no doubt you've had to go through a ton of training, a ton of self-reflection, and lots of decompression, if you will, and changing in who you are and how you move through the world, in honing the skills to be able to fish out certain pieces of information, to close out a case, to investigate it and get true justice, if possible, on a case or an environment or a story or an experience that's happened. What has that taught you about you?
That's a good question. I think that part of the reality was, I got on the Chicago Police Department in the early 90s and made detective in 2000. So I was a detective for most of my career and working in homicide that whole time. Unfortunately, the police departments, I think municipalities around this country, we're just starting to figure out the mental health aspects. And so we had some, um, resources available to us, but not much. And it was still a little bit stigmatized. Very late in my career, I think much better now for the officers who are working now. It's not perfect. It still has a way to go. We still have struggle. Really sadly, we struggle with the intensely high rate of suicides
Mm,
among police officers and things like that, and beyond that, divorces and alcoholism, things like that, are that. But my personal journey was kind of just figuring it out, and I really like wanted to be a homicide detective as even as a young person. When I was 16 years old, I
mm,
read, as part of a book report, I read Truman Capote's In Cold
right.
Blood, and it just changed kind of the way I looked at the world. And I don't think I could have articulated at the time, but I knew I wanted to do something like that. And then as I went to college and I got a criminal psychology degree,
Mhm,
and then eventually got a police department, I kind of honed down exactly what it was that I wanted to do. And I got very lucky in getting the opportunity to do it, and I loved it. But no matter what you read or hear, or even as a patrolman working the street, the amount of violence that you are forced to deal with as a homicide detective in a city like Chicago is, there's nothing you can do to prepare for that until you start to see it.
right.
And once I started doing as much as I loved it, I realized, oh, I don't know how this is sustainable over a
Mhm,
lifetime. I mean, 6 months in, I'm like, every day, I mean, every day we're going to be dealing with death and violence. I just
mhm,
didn't expect it. So I had to adjust, and it was a learning process. And eventually, I think that I started to figure myself out. I started to kind of reach out uh, to people that knew what they were doing to kind of get help. But yeah, it was a real process for me, and that process continued after I retired. To kind of self exploration and
mhm,
trying to figure out, understanding that I think I did a lot of good and I had a lot of positive effect on victims' families and things. It's hard to see when you're in the middle of it, but
yeah,
start to acknowledge that as I got older and got away from it, especially as the victims' families were so gracious to me,
mm,
especially when I retired. It was really emotional to speak with them, and so yeah, it's been a journey that I had to kind of seek out on my own. I had through trial and error, I met some really good therapists who uh, did some great work with me. And, I'm not a guy that lives with regret. My
right.
grandmother taught me that regret and jealousy are wasted emotions. I don't know if that's completely true, but it's not a
Yeah.
bad way to look at the world. But I do often think, man, if I was in it would have been cool to have been in the kind of mental, comfortable space I'm in now, like when I was a young detective,
Yeah.
because I think I'd have been a little uh, better equipped to do the job, but I did the
Mm,
best I could at the
of
time.
course. Yeah.
So,
Ultimately, that's all we got, right?
yeah, right. That's it.
That's all we got. We do the best we can when, with the tools that we have at that moment of time.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah.
Agree.
Yeah. So that book was so influential to you that it really gave you a beeline to your career and your life path of moving forward. When you started and 6 months in, and you had this perhaps awakening going, oh my gosh, this is really what it's going to be like day in, day out. I need to make changes rather than being in a place of maybe I need a different career. That didn't
Y-
hit. Was that
No,
not an option for you to
no, it wasn't,
explore?
because I knew that it was kind of my calling. Like I just felt comfortable. It felt like, you know, even among my peers, and I worked with some unbelievably great human beings and homicide detectives, men and women. And I saw courage and intelligence, and just it's almost hard to describe. And it was so heartening to me, and so valuable to my self-esteem that I fit into that. But even
Mm-hmm.
inside of those parameters, I sometimes felt like I was calmer and able to deal with things better than some. And so it felt very comfortable to me. I had to acknowledge the toll that it was taking, um, the, the human aspect of, wow, this is just day in and day out of this. And I think, I think it's most equated. I spent a lot of time in hospitals, interviewing people and victims and things. It's best equated, I think, to like trauma surgeons, trauma nurses. And,
Sure.
I think anybody would look at them and say, how do you do that all the time? How do you,
Mm-hmm.
young kids who are severely injured, and how do you deal with it? Well, I mean, they look at it as they have a job to do,
Yes.
and they have to set that aside. And being a homicide detective is really the same thing. Whatever, however horrible it is, and whatever, thing that's in front of you, you have to set that kind of emotion aside and do the job and do it clinically, and you have to do it with compassion and empathy,
Sure.
but you have to get the job done.
Yes.
And but the back end of that, I realized pretty quickly, is that I could do that well, but there was going to be a toll to be paid. And I could never tell over the course of years. I started to kind of hone and figure it out, but I could never tell whether it was going to be like 2 days later or a week later or 6 months later.
Mm.
Whatever that trauma was going to catch up to me. It was going to catch up to me in a myriad of ways. Stop,
Yes.
sleeping, or be aggravated,
Right.
or, not taking care of myself the way I should,
Yeah.
not dealing in my interpersonal relationships as well as I would. And because it wasn't immediately attached to that trauma, and the trauma kept kind of rolling over, it
Mm-hmm.
was hard to, it took a while to articulate and figure out. And, but I eventually I started saying, this is likely due to that thing that I knew was going to catch up at some point.
Yeah.
And then it really wasn't until I started, talking to professionals and asking them the questions like, why does the brain work like this? Why can I be this calm and do my job like this really well and feel
Yes.
like I'm performing a high level under such great duress? But then in my personal life, feel like I never really have control of that, and I found some good people who kind of knew for me what I wanted wasn't like um, pats on the back, or, oh, you're okay, you're doing great. Well, it wasn't that. I needed data. I needed to know, what do the studies say? What's the psychology of this? What
Mm-hmm.
what are the psychologists saying about the long-term effects of things? That's what I needed to know, kind of the way my brain worked. And as I started to get that information, it really helped, and it
Mm.
shifted my focus a lot towards,
Yeah.
self-care and awareness,
Yeah. Big work.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I guess it was, but I think I'm making a little too dramatic. I mean, it's rough seeing violent death all the time. There's no way to sugarcoat that. But on the other hand, it was incredibly rewarding. I always felt like I was doing something, I mean, there was a point where there is a point where you have to reach this tough kind of watershed moment that happens to everybody, that, I go into it thinking I'm going to change the world.
Mm-hmm.
And there does come a point where you have to come to realization, like, and part of it is self-preservation. Like, if Mike Hammond goes on vacation, the end of the world's not coming. You know what I
That's
mean?
right.
Like, it's going to
That's right.
continue to go. You're not changing the world. What you're doing is trying to incrementally make individual people's lives
Yeah.
better, get justice for victims. And you have to look at things kind of incrementally, instead of like, oh, I'm here to change the world, which kind of everybody does. I think everybody in every walk of life goes
Sure.
into that, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I'm
Exactly.
really going to have a wide influence in that. Yeah, I think then you start to realize after a while, I love the saying, like, if you want to change the world, sweep the sidewalk in front of your house. I think that really
Mm.
resonates because it does turn out to be the small day-to-day things that make a big difference and not the big, oh, I'm going to change the world type of
That's
thing.
right. Yeah.
So,
It's not the big sweep often that does it. It's the
yeah,
smaller sweeps that have that consistent impact, right? Yeah, exactly.
agree.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In order for you to be in that space and while you learned your own style to cope and manage that process internally for yourself, but I'm sure there were adjustments made externally, be it the dialogue you'd have with your mentors or your interpersonal relationships with your family. What do you feel were some of the attributes that allowed you to do that, that you learned and that became part of you, be it an innate part that you recognize you didn't realize you had, that quality, and externally that was taught to you, be it through personal reflection or through therapy sessions or through the offerings of training and support through the institute, if you will.
Yeah, I think, well, I mean, at the start, I think that one of the things that served me well that I probably couldn't have articulated early, but I realized um, internally and by external kind of stimuli that my natural ability to communicate and talk to people was a tremendous value as a detective. I often make the argument that being a homicide detective is, like 2% Sherlock Holmes, right? And 10% intelligence and whatever, but a great percentage of it is the ability to talk to people with empathy and to understand and to listen and to get
Yeah,
people to want to talk to you. And I kind of have a natural ability, I've always had a natural ability just to talk and listen. And I've also, and I kind of give this credit to my mother and my grandmother. I've never been afraid to express my own emotion. And,
mm,
um, you know, I've never had that kind of stigma of, oh, I'm gonna tough through this. If
yeah,
something bothered me, I was comfortable saying something bothered me, and I got a lot of support with that. A lot of maybe I was surprised by this, and I think maybe other people were surprised. But I worked with these really, I think from the outside, people say very tough human beings. Very, you see them walk in a room thinking, I don't know what those people are, but they're
mm,
something. Tough looking.
mm,
And they were that, men and women, but they were also like a lot of them like me, and even the ones that weren't like me that were a little older school and more closed in with their emotion, very supportive of me and the other people we worked with, the expressing anger, frustration, hurt, sadness. We were a very close knit, kind of organization, and
mhm,
Area Four was the homicide district I work in. We're all very proud to have been from Area Four. It's one of the five detective areas in the city, and they're all good. But for us in Area Four, we were good at our job. We were close, and we were supportive of each other,
yeah,
uh, and I think that, and it's we in that way we kind of in a lot of ways, we kind of uh, what's the
support.
word, corrected or
Okay,
self
yeah, correct. Yeah,
helped, because nobody was afraid to, kind of be who they were, and not everybody
right.
was the same. But so, I think that played a big part in it. It really did. If somebody was hurting, you go talk to them, and Um, so very lucky to be in
Yeah,
that. 20 years before that, it probably doesn't quite go that way because it's different time, different
sure.
kind of attitudes, different stigmas towards, showing emotion.
Yeah,
Um, and that's not a judgment, it's just a difference in, kind of
that's
time
right.
period. And
It's just the nature of humanity, I guess, if you will.
yeah,
Yeah,
agreed, agreed.
yeah,
And also I just don't want to downplay the testament to the people I worked with.
mm,
Just really outstanding human beings who all kind of had the same goal and kind of we all tried to lift each other up. It wasn't a competition, you know?
And that's ultimately it, right? So the analogy you're using of sweeping the sidewalk, it's still done as a supportive nature, as a collective. So one person sweeps their own sidewalk, it's going to influence the entire neighborhood. And if everybody does it, then it has a positive impact. Working in a team, working in an environment, especially in your field, I think it's even more crucial that that collaboration and that connectiveness stays really tight knit, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I am still very close with a lot of people I worked with, and it's still a very tight network of people that are supportive of each other, and it's not perfect. I mean, those things is, that haunt us, suicides and those kind of problems are there. We just lost one of our crew, one of our tight people a couple years ago committed suicide, and it was
Mm.
tough because and just it's another it was another learning experience for all of us
Mm.
that he was the guy that would been the last guy you'd think so, always happy,
Right.
always in a good place, retired with his wife and living a great life, and just,
Mm.
well, how can this be, well, I don't know, but we have to just, I think it re kind of reinforced to us we needed to stay, need to stay connected. We needed to stay tight, and like, I started this podcast, and they've been very supportive of it. And it's a little bit counterintuitive for us to put ourselves out there like that.
Sure.
We always
Yeah,
have to worry about the victims' families,
that's right.
the integrity of these cases. So I'm
Yeah.
really careful about, what I say and how I do it.
Hmm.
But that core group of people I worked with have been very supportive. Some of them have been on the podcast, which
Nice.
is really, means a lot to me.
Absolutely. That's great. How do you see the the face of humanity change? So granted, when we go into a field at a very ripe age of 20 something, we come in with a place of naivety and we look at things in a very green, new state. And it's equally jarring and possibly alarming at the same time. And as you ventured through your career, how have you seen humanity change externally in terms of the types of crime that you see in the types of behavior that influences that, be it from a victim standpoint, but also from the perpetrator standpoint too? How have you seen that shift over the decades of your career?
That's a really good question that I haven't thought a lot about, but I mean, there has been a shift. I think that, you know, I have this personal contention that we're all much closer than the kind of external entities out there want us to believe that we are. And I don't want, I don't want to go too far off into, like, media, social media and all that. But
Mhm.
I think there is a part of this that's going on with us right now that the world has become smaller because of communication and the ability to get information and communicate, which is a good thing in a lot of ways. But what I do think what it's done that's not as great is it's become a little more impersonal. You can kind of go on social
Right.
media and say whatever you want. Um, what used to be all of us felt like we could have some trust in our nightly news guy,
Yes.
like I'm old enough use Walter Cronkite as an example.
Mhm.
I'm not saying Walter Cronkite was a perfect human being, but we all kind of looked towards him as like, we believed him, right? And
Yeah.
it didn't ever seem like, well, he's selling a product. It seemed
Right.
like he was, reporting what was going on in the world, so we knew. It now seems like no matter what the entity is and what the political shift is, it all seems like they're all kind of trying to sell a product. It's not about integrity anymore. It's not about, and so this kind of fear mongering and things go
Mhm.
on at every level by everybody, it seems. and then the social media aspect. And so again, I don't mean to be on a soapbox. There are good things about it. But I think what it's done though, it's made us believe that we are much more separated than we are.
Right.
Um, and I feel that because, I worked in mainly poor African American and Spanish neighborhoods,
Right.
had really good relationships with people, which had proven out even when I started this podcast. I reached out to some of my victims' families I haven't talked to in 20 years, and I didn't know how they would feel. But I wanted to be fair and tell them, hey, I'm doing this. And the response I got was so great. I mean, several of them, were guests on my show, and they're just happy that I remember their family members. And when we talked, it was, I think that the narrative that seems to be out there that, I'm this white policeman and I should be at odds with this, African American person, in this poor neighborhood. That's kind of what we're sold to believe, but
Hmm.
that's not true. It's like two
Hmm.
old friends talking. And look,
Hmm.
we met over a short period of time in what was the worst experience of their life, right? They lost a loved one to violent crime, and I wasn't any big hero. I mean, that whole closure thing is a very misunderstood thing. There's no closure really. It's just kind of getting answers, and maybe closing some doors, but they never get over the loss.
Sure.
But in revisiting it and talking to him again, it was just so heartening because we're just talking like
Yeah.
two old friends or two human beings who just have had to deal with trauma and moving through life and still seeing joy and finding the ability to laugh. I'm not trying to be trite or anything, but I just
Mhm.
think that's what we are.
Yeah.
That's much more what we are in reality
Yeah.
than what we're inundated with. And
Right.
and I'm afraid that that lends itself to crime, to I don't, the numbers are hard to tell because everybody kind of plays with the numbers for political reasons, but there's this overwhelming feeling that crime is higher and it's more arbitrary. It's more,
Hmm.
and whether that's true or not, that impression that's there is bad. And it causes us this separation of kind of us versus them, not just racially, but
Right.
economically and politically and everything else. And to me, that's not what it really is, and it's a shame that
Mhm.
that's the message because the truth of the matter is, in my experience, everybody wants the same thing, right? Everybody wants to be happy
Ultimately.
and safe and find
Yeah.
joy, and for their children to be safe and have opportunities, and everybody wants those things. We're always close as people in those goals, and we should focus more on that. In terms of crime, I feel like I'm afraid I'm seeing that the crime being more arbitrary, more violent, and you know, I hope we can get that changed. We'll see.
How much of an influence do you think social media has on it? Or should I say, maybe even the element or this accessibility that we have to technology with these things called phones? So while it can lean into a positive space, it can also lead to a negative space too, because there's two sides to every single coin, right? We have food accessible, available to us, but if we overeat, then that's not healthy either. So it's the same thing. While social media, not while technology has become more online over the last number of decades, how has that influenced to the types of crime that you have witnessed, I guess, when you was because you've
Yeah,
probably seen the full spectrum of it, right? So the time of when social media, cell phones weren't even a thing
yeah,
to every
totally.
single body has one.
Yeah, I mean, uh, I don't want to. Mostly I don't think it's a positive thing
Hmm.
because of it removes actual social interaction
Hmm.
and allows for this kind of anonymity of and every election cycle, and this one, everyone I can remember, since I was 18 and first voted, it always seemed like every presidential election was contentious, but it just seems to be more growing in aggravation and growing in separation. And we can blame the candidates if we want. We can do all that, but the fact of the matter is, I think that this anonymity of social media and this just kind of allowing of this um, just you can't even have discussions. And the reason is, if you and I are sitting in a room and we're having a discussion, we can disagree, but it's really hard to escalate it if we're human beings. Like, I don't really want to hurt you. I don't want to be angry with you. I might not
Right.
agree with your position on something, but we're much more likely to kind of talk through and say, all right, well, I'll give you that, but I kind of feel this way, right?
Yeah.
Where social media, it's a bully pulpit a lot of times, and it's
Mm.
just, I'm going to scream out my belief system, and if you disagree, well, you're a really horrible, horrible person,
Right.
and that hurts us. And in terms of crime, it just, I think it escalates that kind of uh, ambient kind of stress and anxiety everybody has, which can lead to more anger and violence and misunderstanding,
Mm.
and it's not good. I have no idea how to rein it in right now. I mean, I reel it in. Maybe you can't. I mean, free speech is a real thing that needs to be protected. But I do think maybe, I don't know where I'd start with it, but maybe educating people to say, hey, put that phone down. Just walk out, talk to your neighbor.
Yeah. Right.
You're going to agree with some things, you're going to disagree with some things, but do it with empathy and compassion. And
Yeah.
you'll find that suddenly, life becomes a lot less stressful, but you
Yeah.
sit on that phone all day. And I got to add here, um, I have to just be very plain for young people. Um, I don't know the exact age, and I'm not a psychologist or psychiatrist, but I just think anybody under about 19 years of age, there is no upside. It's all
Mm.
ugly, negative stuff that really pushes kids who are trying to, when you're 17 years old, you're just trying to figure everything out. What's happening with
Yeah.
my body? Well, I'm so
Sure.
worried about school. I'm so worried about, I know whole communities in this city that are just worried about getting to school without something bad happening,
Mm.
and now you're worried about this on your phone and somebody saying something about you on your phone. It's all bad news. Again, unfortunately, I don't have an answer for it, but
Yeah.
I think as parents, the more you can limit exposure for kids, your kids to that social media, the better off, the
Yeah.
more well-rounded and adjusted they're going to be. Again,
Right.
it's not like I'm on a soapbox, but
Yeah.
I see so much ugly stuff with it.
Yeah. And it's powerful, so influential of how the media, the perhaps people with bigger and deeper pockets can influence us because that's what's driving the market, that's what's driving the messaging, either the product, the service, whatever it looks like, which then ultimately curbs at somebody's own self-esteem,
Yeah, right. I mean,
right?
again, you look at I don't want to oversimplify this. I am not a geopolitician, anything like that, but
Mhm.
it just makes me wonder because of my life dealing with conflict and violence and trauma. I just wonder how much of, I see that there's a lot of um, conflict going on in England right now. There's clearly a lot of conflict going on in Gaza and these things.
Sure.
And I honestly wonder to myself how much of that is driven by like social media and people
Yeah.
who are controlling those things that are going to
Yeah.
benefit from that conflict.
Yeah.
Because once again, I think that, I don't want to oversimplify this, but I just believe in my heart. You put all that aside and you walk across the street and you start talking to somebody, and um, you're like, well, they're not that much different than me. I don't, we get along pretty well. I mean,
Mhm.
and that's, again, that sounds oversimplified, but I just think it's so much harder to really build up anger and hate towards people when when you actually see them and talk to them, and you see them out playing with their kids, and you realize, yeah, they kind of want the same thing I want. You know what I mean? Like,
But ultimately, isn't it? What is it in our life trajectory that has really made life so much more complicated? Life really is simple.
yeah,
We all
I
need to
agree.
eat. We all need to sleep. We all need community. We all want to belong. We all want a place to be. We all want to be loved and to love.
Yeah,
Regardless of where you go around the world, those are the fundamentals of what a human being craves. So, do we make it more complicated than is really necessary?
I think that we do. I mean, I really do think that we do, and I think that there are some tremendous advantages, obviously, to our leaps and bounds in technology and science and medical science and that. But I do think it can come with a heavy price, and I think that might be the price in that we start to get away from that understanding of yeah, everybody wants the same thing. It really, you know what I mean? Like, um, for the most part, obviously there are people out there through trauma or life experience or
Sure.
that don't want the same things are that's why we have prisons, unfortunately. That's why we do those. There are just going to be people, unfortunately, and I've seen a lot of them that I, for
Mm.
maybe there are reasons, maybe it's just some shift in the mind that we can't explain, but they can't be part of society. They're going to hurt people, but that's not most people, you know. I think
Right.
most people, um, you know, if you look on TV and see a riot of two groups of people fighting and throwing things at each other, I, if there's any, there's very few of those evil, you know, maladjusted people in there in
Sure.
my thought process. Mostly it's just kind of a mob mentality sent
Yeah.
information that they glom onto. It's not, you've
Yeah.
gotten away from that, like looking across the aisle and saying, ah, this
Mhm.
person's not that much different than me, really, you know. At least, again, I'm oversimplifying, I'm kind of repeating myself, but I think it's not like kumbaya. It's just like, you know, and this is how you survive, by communication and understanding, you know. I
But
don't
in
know.
the same token, perhaps, and obviously I'm not in your space, I've not had your experiences and exposure to to that those people in those spaces. Perhaps those who are in prisons and are convicted for their acts, if they were in a community, hypothetically saying, where they're seen, they're heard, they're felt, and they're loved, and having this, I'm not talking utopia, I'm
Mhm.
talking a place where people can feel like they belong
Yeah,
and feel like they're a part of a community, be it them going out there and sweeping their version of that sidewalk every day. To have that place of belonging, would that curb that bell, if you will, of those people who have gone into prison and those who have committed such crimes that put them there? Would that curb it? Because perhaps people who do act in such ways are ultimately craving something to be crave attention. Because what we know, for the limited that I know in terms of that space, hurt people.
yeah, agreed. And look, even at its base, um, you know, what's it hurt to try and find out the answers to what you're saying? Because one thing that seems clear right now, what we're doing and the way we're approaching it isn't working, right?
Right.
All we're doing is filling more prisons
Yeah.
you know, I don't know. It's you know, we've got an issue here, yeah, not to get political at all, but we've just got an issue here in this city, and it's happened someplace in the United States where they made the decision, maybe with good intent, but to try and backtrack. Oh, we're going to give criminals more opportunity, people who commit crimes more opportunity. So we're going to, get rid of cash bail. We're going to release more people on the street so they're not imprisoned and you have more opportunity. It's not a bad thought, but in practical application, it wasn't well thought out, because we are being inundated now with people who commit violent crimes who are not being held and they're being released on the street, and they just escalate their violent crimes, right? Because what you're doing in that is you're not creating an environment for them to succeed. You're just giving them more opportunity to fail, which they just don't have the skill set or that to succeed.
Yeah, they
And
just repeat it.
And that's dramatically increased our violent crime in this city, in my opinion. But I agree. I mean, there are things that need to be done. I mean, I get people that ask me all the time, well, what can be done about violent crime? What can be done, about some of our neighborhoods that are really underserved and changed because we've tried all these things. And, I'm not that smart. I don't know, but my life experience in spending most of my life in some of these rough neighborhoods is exactly what you said. I mean, first of all, you have to give them a voice. Stop telling them what's best for them and ask them what they want and what they need. Give them hope, give them opportunity, put money into those communities that other communities have for good schools, job opportunities, and that. And it's a big investment. It's a lot. And you have to start kind of way back, hoping, okay, this may not change things in a year, but in 20 years, maybe it can dramatically change things, right? And it seems like it's overwhelming. Nobody wants to do it. It's so much easier to kind of politically put a Band-Aid on it, throw money at it. But it's not what I don't think poor people want, or in these hopeless neighborhoods. I don't think it's what they want. They just want what everybody else wants: an opportunity, hope, to be given the opportunity to feel safe, right? So you gotta make that investment in the communities to make that happen. And there's precedent for us to do it. Like when we in 1941, and this is a trite example, but to me it's the most obvious one. We were trying to stay out of World War II, and then the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, and then we, as a country, made a shift, and almost overnight, we turned into a country turning out ships, turning out stuff to go fight a war against, maybe the most evil,
Country.
Or regime to ever walk the face of the earth, in Hitler and the Nazis, and we successfully did it. Well, if we did that, in my mind, then we can make those efforts and change the course of lives for underserved people in this country, and thereby do a lot of great things, not just for them, but for the cost of the healthcare that 5,000 gunshot victims a year in the city of Chicago cost the city, and the hopelessness and despair. It can be done. And again, I'm on a soapbox. I'm trying, but if I'm being asked, that's my feeling about it. We all have to sweep our sidewalk, and that's part of it. I don't see a short answer to it. I get I turn off. I don't listen to TV and that, because I hear this and I hear politicians talking. I'm just like, yeah, all right.
Yeah.
Heard it. Heard it. It's not going to change anything.
Time
So
again.
that sounds, I'm not trying to be, again,
No, but it's real, right? You've been in the industry, you've been in the space for decades, so you've seen this life cycle of lots of things and lots of people, in whether it's just lip service from a politician, or whether it's a leadership or a new idea from your, I guess, federal or even municipal, your state-driven areas that says, hey, we should try this. You've seen the cycle of it, and unfortunately, it's not influential to have a sustainable impact to better people individually. And perhaps I'm cautious to go down another route of a conversation in terms of who is running, who's running the bigger show that's having the influence that's stopping it in our tracks to allow this circus, if you will, that's happening on our globe in various countries, various states, cities, and towns that keeps that cycle perpetuated.
Yeah.
Because we know we can stop it. You just turn all the traffic lights red.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, that's
You
it.
stop
I agree with you. And I think that, it's just my personal belief, again, not to go too far down this road, that like, there are things that seem attractive, right? The tenets of like communism or social, they seem attractive. Everybody plays their part. But what we've seen historically is that it really doesn't play out that way. And
it.
people just get more victimized, and people who take advantage and get wealthy get wealthier in bigger ways than poor people stay where they're at.
Yeah.
I don't have a big social answer here, but I do think in the end, you just got to get people motivated. And probably it's going to be financial, whether that's
Mhm.
right or not,
Mhm.
to make all of this better, one of the things, again, I'm a very probably moderate political person, but I do think that I often go talk to, like, I have friends who are school teachers, and I talk to groups of kids from like middle school age to high school, college, and often in kind of underserved, what considered rough neighborhoods. And I always try and impart on them that, don't let anybody tell you that you're disadvantaged, or that you're at a disadvantage
Sure.
or anything like that, because all life experience has value. And sometimes overcoming adversity is the most valuable thing.
Yeah.
And when you grow up in some of these really rough neighborhoods, you know how to overcome adversity as part of your DNA. Because
Yes.
every day you walk out, you got to look up and down the street. You're just trying to get to school without getting shot. As
That's
horrible
right.
as that sounds,
Yeah.
but there is value in that, right? Because in the real world, when we get out there and you get into business and you start doing things, you're going to face adversity, and then you can't be protected from it.
Yeah.
And when you do, how are you going to react to it? Well, it's my belief that, when you grow up in those kind of environments, you know instinctively how to deal with adversity, and that's a great value add. And
Mhm.
I hope that we can start to make these young people understand that and see that as that, because it should be a value add to their self-confidence, their self-esteem as well. Um, Again, I don't have all the answers. I'm not
No.
a, bleeding
Yeah.
heart can
Yeah.
change the world, but that's just, I've seen a lot of horrible violence and death, and it's not what it's supposed to be.
Right.
I don't
Right.
know what I
Oh,
mean.
absolutely. But then it does kind of beg the question, perhaps, from my vantage point of just like with you, you read the book and you knew that was the career that you was to take. That was the path that you was to spend the rest of your life in, and augment all the other parts of your life 6 months in, so you can continue to do that work. So for me, it begs the question of what if everybody's they are where they're supposed to be? And it sounds maybe primitive, but from a perspective of what if they're meant to be there? Be it to learn from adversity, be it to learn from an element of judgment, or learn from it, to the people who have different types of opportunities and privileges and opportunities. What if we're all here at the right place at the right time?
It's a good question, right? And it's a really interesting perspective. And I think, to add to that, I think that, I mean, it's really critical, to understand that from a lot of different, uh, kind of vantage points, is where I am not right now is not where I'm forced to be forever, right? I I have the opportunity to change what I am or be a better version of what I am
Mhm.
all the time. And I think that's true whether you're sitting in a jail cell, whether
Right.
you're going through a horrible divorce and you think your life is over, whether you've dealt with some, pick one,
Yep.
right? Even if you're a successful CEO who seems to have everything that everybody could want or need, is there not room to be a better version of yourself? I think it's
Absolutely.
very, very rare that
Absolutely.
that's true, right? I mean, and so I think to your point, um, maybe we are all where we're supposed to be. Um, and that's maybe not a bad thing because you look around and say, wow, there are positive things here, and I certainly know what I don't want to do,
Yeah.
right? So,
Exactly. Exactly.
um, I don't know. I don't know
Yeah.
the answer to that, but I
Yeah.
think
I don't know either. I'm just
it's a good, I
just
think it's a really good thing to kind of get your head wrapped around, you
yeah.
know?
Because there is ultimately a silver lining in every single thing that happens, be it that it is a death, which gives us an opportunity for a birth, a rebirth, be it part of ourselves, be it a relationship, be it a family member, whatever it is. It gives us the opportunity to do it, but it's having the courage
Yeah.
to be able to recognize that there is an opportunity here in amidst all of this yuckiness, if you
Right.
will, that is there. So we have that opportunity. Every single human being has it, but it's whether they're willing to see it.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree with that, and sometimes I think that it's hard to see yourself sometimes. Sometimes you need guidance. You need
Yes.
somebody to kind of give you the information uh, to find that path,
Yeah,
to figure out in your head, well, I don't have to be this. It doesn't have
that's
to
right.
be this. I can be something else, you know?
That's right. Yeah. So you've been through a lot. You've learned a lot, and you still continue to give a lot, from what I understand. What's next for you? Because you're retired, apparently.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, my daughter talked me into starting this podcast, and I was hesitant to do it. She loves the true crime space, and she's like, "Yeah, Dad, they're good, but they're missing your perspective." And took some time, some conversations with some people I worked in, and I started doing. I enjoyed it. It does give me the opportunity to feel like I'm still kind of doing some productive things.
Yeah,
Um, I think what's next is to continue to do that, in a way now where I'm not kind of feeling tethered to the
right.
responsibilities of a city and the politics of a city to
Sure.
try and help some people maybe and tell some stories, trying to kind of get some more understanding out there of what the job was and
Hmm. Hmm.
what's faced by it. I try and do that, in general, I think, just trying to work in I've been trying to teach myself to speak Spanish, and I have an instructor who's incredibly patient. I'm like the worst student, but it's my life
Yeah,
goal to learn to speak Spanish for whatever
love
reason.
it.
But
Yeah,
in general, it's one of those things like I'm just trying to find things to always kind of trying to be a little better version of
yeah,
myself. My kids really
sure.
prop me up in that, but
Good
yeah,
man.
so that's kind of the next thing, just to be out there like this. I appreciate you having me on to have these
Absolutely.
conversations. I
Absolutely.
love
Yeah.
these kind of conversations, and you're great at it. We're
Thank you.
stripping away all the
The other stuff.
noise and just talking about, hey, what's good, and how can we make it better? And
That's
I
right.
appreciate that a
Yeah.
great deal.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Mike, for sharing your stories, your journey, your perspectives. And I'm sure there's a whole bunch of other perspectives that maybe we do as a part two. Maybe we have you on it again and unravel some of those pieces as you go further into retirement, or maybe step back and have a different vantage point of what's going on in the world. But for now, I am extremely grateful for you sharing your stories, taking your time and energy to have this conversation that we can get to share with the world. So Thank you
It's
so
truly
much.
my pleasure. It really is. And I'm honored to come back anytime.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
I'm Naranjan, and you've been listening to Master of Your Crafts podcast. Please subscribe, rate, and review, and join me next week for another episode. Thank you for listening.